Welcome back to the Everyday Armor podcast. Today, I do want to give a disclaimer that throughout this episode, there are going to be mentions of some sensitive topics such as sex trafficking, sexual exploitation, sexual exploitation of minors, though there is nothing graphic that we get into. And there's also talk of domestic violence. So if those things are sensitive, I do just want to give you a heads up. This is really meant to be an informative episode, teaching you about human trafficking, myths about it, how it really happens, and some of the red flag signs and risk factors to be aware of as well. So I hope you give this one a listen, but I did just want to give that quick disclaimer. This week, we're going to be talking about something that was really honestly a huge catalyst for why I actually started Everyday Armor. I just got tired of listening to all of these misconceptions and myths around trafficking. And I think it's kind of one of the more detrimental things that I tend to see on social media when it comes to safety. I mean, there's so many different things that people will talk about, misinformation out there, but when you really stop and look at human trafficking, it is such a big issue, and there are just so many myths that get perpetuated. And I will never forget, and I think I've told the story on the podcast before, but I was looking at social media. This was, I think, when I was still in college. And I remember seeing, I think it was like 2018 or 2019. And it was like a slide of all these things that you should know if you were afraid of like being kidnapped or trafficked. And there were people like showing you how to get out of the trunk of a car and talking about stuff on your car. And it just was so aggravating to me because I knew that these things weren't true. And especially if you take like psychology classes or any kind of classes like that, like sociology, like you kind of learn about those things inadvertently. And I had known these things, but it was like, how can this stuff go so viral on the internet and nobody checks anyone? And if you go look at the comments on a lot of these videos, people are like, thank you so much for warning us. Like I'm sending this to my daughter, to my sister, my friends. And it's such a problem because those are the videos that sometimes get the most traction because they do instill a lot of fear. So they create this like visceral reaction from people where they want to share that information. But then when you look at what's actually going on, it's not nearly as attractive. And the problem is a lot of times because we don't know a ton about trafficking, because it does seem like something that's really scary and freaky, we want things that feel more tangible or, very like sure red flags we can look out for. So when you hear something like, oh, they put zip ties on your car, okay, I'm just going to look out for the zip ties. If I avoid the zip ties, I'm not going to get trafficked. But the problem with that is what's really happening is not so linear. These are things that happen over time. A lot of traffickers are very patient. They groom, they manipulate all of their victims, and not all of their victims, most of their victims. And that's the hard thing. It's very difficult to see these things coming, and there's no certain type of person to look out for. It can be anybody that's trafficking you. And what's especially sad is a lot of times they're targeting people who are in a very vulnerable season of life. And that's why in my classes, I always try to advocate to build self-esteem and be very mindful of the people you trust and keep around you, because going through vulnerable seasons of life is inevitable. And we'll talk about some of like the more prominent risk factors, but we all go through very difficult seasons of life. And I mean, that's an inevitable part of the human experience. So you have to make sure that you can really rely on and trust the people around you. They have your best interest at heart, because traffickers can even be family members. You could be getting sex trafficked in your own home. So today I really want to break down what are a lot of the viral myths, especially the ones that just piss me the fuck off. And actually, you know what? I just saw a video of a cop who is in uniform making videos about the fentanyl on dollar bills and how if you touch it, you're going to get dizzy. And then he made a video about how there's this trend going on that he's seen in the police force where kids that are in distress are going and luring women in to get trafficked. You're wearing a uniform. People inherently trust you a lot more when they see that uniform when you're talking about crime. And I reached out to this person and I was like, hey, I'd love to know where these trends are occurring and like what you've seen, because I work with a lot of trafficking experts and we also facilitate a ton of research on this topic. And those things have never been confirmed. So if this is like a recent thing that really truly is happening, I'd love to hear like where these things are going on and have a further conversation about this. No response. Then he finally responds and says, I work for the federal government. I know what I'm talking about. I'm like, okay. just because you're a cop does not mean that you know what you're talking about when it comes to crimes that are very difficult to actually detect. And like, if there's verified cases of this, then like just be forthcoming with it. Tell me where it's happening. Said nothing. I sent him another message. Hey, like I just wanted to follow up and like see where this is happening. And meanwhile, I had just actually posted a random video that went viral about trafficking. And then I sent another follow-up because I was making a lot of videos about this and like how really does it happen, which is also why I'm doing this podcast. But I sent like a whole video and I was like, hey, like I've really reached out to you. I've tried to do this privately. I didn't want to like call you out publicly. Like your video had over 1 million views and I believe there's misinformation in it. If this is really happening, I would just like to hear more about it because like I can't find it anywhere. And if you're knowingly spreading misinformation and keeping it pinned on your profile because it got a lot of views, that's a very dishonest thing to do, especially as somebody who is in law enforcement, perpetuating these very detrimental myths. Because when you start looking for the child in distress or you start looking for the dollar bill on the ground, you are inherently avoiding the most common symptoms and how trafficking most often happens. So today we are going to break down what that process looks like, what these myths look like, and how you can really try to armor yourself against human trafficking and spot it in your day-to-day life. So without further ado, let's go down this rabbit hole of all the myths. And I want to preface all of these by saying the myths being disproven does not mean that there haven't been reports of these things. You may have had a cloth on your car, a water bottle by your tire, but that does not mean that that was linked to trafficking. People can do things to also distract you, where they try to come steal your belongings or carjack you. Still a relatively rare thing, especially with these tactics here. Most of the time, they're just going to look for somebody probably on their phone and target them quick. They're not going to go through all of that work, but these things can happen. They could be in connection more so with those things. However, still relatively uncommon, but always have your wits about you. Anything can happen. So let's dive in. Number 1, the dollar bill with the fentanyl. I've been seeing this one all over the place. This has not only been disproven by like experts, healthcare experts that say just touching fentanyl is not going to cause an overdose. And you can look this up yourself. The CDC has come out to say this. There's also even in PMC, it talks about how like academic papers have disputed these claims. You're not going to touch a dollar bill and then get dizzy and pass out. And there was a case where this happened, and I'm totally blanking on where exactly it had happened, but this woman was with her family. They stopped at a gas station. She picked up a dollar bill, and then she started to feel like dizzy and had some other side effects and symptoms, went to the hospital, and they did a news report on this. Well, if you go look up the articles, at the bottom, it talks about how experts have said this is highly unlikely that that's what caused these symptoms. So for just even that, the science behind this idea is really lacking. Then on top of that, you also have departments, police departments, like local law enforcement that have come out to disprove that there are any cases where this is linked to kidnapping, let alone kidnapping and human trafficking. So that's kind of our first one here. And again, like I just want to reiterate, that doesn't mean that like someone couldn't try to distract you with a dollar bill on the ground. Again, this is not something that's very common. Always have your wits about you. And truthfully, if it's not your fucking money, don't take it, you know? Like that maybe part of it's like $100 bill, but is it worth it? But again, spreading these things, connecting it to human trafficking is not doing anybody a service because these things are unfounded. There's no credible reports of these things. And I encourage you, do your own research on it. All right, next I want to go into some myths that are listed specifically on the Polaris website. So there's like a whole thing, and I actually have this linked in the link tree in our bio on social media. If you scroll to the bottom, it says human trafficking resources. This page is specifically linked, and I just want to quickly cover, there's more, but these are the ones that like I most commonly see or hear about. First one, zip ties and marked windows. Now, they specifically reference their reports from 2015 to 2022. There is not a single report of this ever being connected to human trafficking. Not only that, but there's a ton of other sites that have come out to disprove this. And there was like this whole thing that like went around with like the zip ties, and law enforcement agencies came out and said, if this is anything, it could be somebody trying to distract to steal things. Most of the time, all they want are your belongings. It's still something to obviously just be mindful of anytime something feels weird with your car, but it is not connected to human trafficking from any reports that have happened. Next thing, text messages about unclaimed packages to like collect your information, like you click a link kind of thing. Maybe it's like your location or whatever else. And again, this does not mean that this isn't a scam. This can still be like phishing or spoofing, more of like the online cyber crimes. This has not been connected to human trafficking. Next thing, abandoned child car seats and the like recordings of crying baby noises. Both of these things, again, even if they've been reported, they have not been connected to human trafficking. Next thing, drug-laced flowers. They specifically state roses, but they also explain like any other kind of like flowers. And a lot of times people think chloroform. And I do just want to say that chloroform, even if you have a cloth doused in chloroform, it's going to typically take minutes of consistent inhalation to actually start to lose consciousness. And really what that tells you is like you still have time to fight for your life. It's not being used on flowers that you sniff, pass out, and they traffic you. Next thing, cloth on a door handle, and PolitiFact and local news stations have also come out to dispute this. So, I just saw this video on I think because I've been posting so much about trafficking, I'm now seeing a ton of these videos. But this lady came out and she was like, I was with my daughter in a parking lot, and she like works in bringing people like trafficking education and does research in it. And she specifically cites this story of her and her daughter in a parking lot, and she came up. There was a cloth on or something, like a bag on her door handle, and the bag on her door handle had like a wooden dollar sign in it, which she states is, a token for trafficking, which I've looked all over the internet. I cannot find any credible report of this being connected with trafficking cases. And it's just ironic because she uses that story to kind of rope you in, like, it was a, potential trafficking scam. And it's like, just because it was scary, just because it was unusual, does not mean it equals trafficking. And for somebody who's working in trafficking education and trafficking research, you should stop trying to fearmonger and use those kinds of stories to connect them to trafficking, which again, most people aren't watching until the end of your video where you say that it, most often though happens by grooming and whatever else that's process we're going to talk about today. Most people don't watch that far. So if you don't have valid evidence that that's linked to trafficking, you should not be claiming that. I've seen this with like videos of people saying that an Amazon package was left in the middle of the street and they use that to lure people out there to grab the package, and then they come kidnap and traffic them. Like, you have to be mindful of these things. But when stuff like this goes viral and you hear these things perpetuated on the internet, the second something scary happens in a parking lot, you immediately think, oh, it must be trafficking them because I've seen videos like this. That is why they are so harmful. And people who are in law enforcement, who work in any leg of human trafficking, should be very, very careful about the shit they post. I digress. Let's talk about the child in distress. So this is, again, the one that I saw on the police officer's page, and it had like 1 point something million views and all kinds of comments about, thank you so much for spreading this information, freaking people the fuck out. Well, according to Snopes, it specifically debunks urban legends about children pretending to be lost used to lure rescuers or assault victims. There is no credible evidence that traffickers routinely use children staged in public. So again, I would still love to hear if this has been verified that a child, and I'm not saying none of these can happen. Again, I would just like to see the credible evidence and research, because this is not something that is widely accepted or talked about, and instead is something that's widely debunked. I digress. Next, the water bottle behind the tire. There is some girl that has been posting so many videos about this, and I keep seeing like different like variations of this video where be careful of this water bottle she has like in her back pocket, or it's like sitting on the tire, it's right behind the tire. This is also something that people think, right? They put it there and you hear a pop, so you get out of your car to go check it. I just want to start by saying, if a trafficker is going to randomly kidnap someone, why in the fuck would they go through all the work to have you back over a water bottle, hoping that works, knowing that's going to probably make a loud noise and maybe attract onlookers, and then wait till you maybe get out of your car to go try to kidnap you? Why wouldn't they just snag you while you're getting into your vehicle? You already getting into your car is already like a barrier that presents to somebody looking to randomly kidnap you. So just the logic doesn't even fully make sense here. But if that's not far enough, Snopes also explains that there is no credible evidence that traffickers or kidnappers will place water bottles on hoods to lure victims or around the vehicle. Okay. Next, we have flyer on car. Guardian Group disproved marking and leaving things on cars. And again, This is just one of those things where they could be something to distract you, to steal your things. More commonly, the flyer on your car is probably somebody trying to advertise something. If you don't feel comfortable getting the flyer, just leave it on your car. Leave it on your car, wait till you're somewhere safe to get it off. You don't have to get it out in the parking lot. Just use those just general safety tips, trust your gut, but that does not mean it's trafficking. And you have to look at, okay, if I'm thinking this is trafficking, you know what, let me go take to the internet, to all my resources, to all of the credible organizations out there, and let's go see if this is actually happening. It's not. Last but not least, being kidnapped from airports. Now this one, I think that because there's so many signs, and even like around Vegas, there's a lot of signs around Vegas with human trafficking. And one of my biggest gripes with them is most trafficking victims, when you really do the research, they don't realize they're being trafficked. And even if they do and they want out, it is very hard for them to leave these situations. They may not only fear for their lives, if they have children that have been born into this situation, maybe their children are being used against them, if they are getting all of their income, their food, their shelter, and if they have been like psychologically manipulated and controlled and groomed into this process, they may also feel like, well, this is also, my lover who's also my trafficker. And that's a very confusing dynamic for this person. So posting up a sign that says, if you think you're being trafficked, call this number, they're not going to do that. And maybe in some cases they do and will, of course. But in a lot of cases, they probably don't realize what's actually happening. Anyways, though, when you see this at airports and you see those signs, they're not cautioning, at big levels. Again, it can happen. It is not common to be kidnapped from an airport and trafficked. They're more cautioning, hey, look out for red flags of somebody that's on a flight going through security that you just see in the airport who could be actively being trafficked. And some of those red flags to look out for, if kids are, maybe they're not traveling with any personal items. Maybe their clothes really don't look like they fit. They just seem kind of out of it, malnourished or under the influence. If they can't answer questions for themselves, they constantly defer to the person they're with. They don't know where they're headed. I actually just saw, when I was going through security at Denver a couple weeks ago, there was a family, and it's funny because I always hear some like variation of this situation where like they'll ask the kids like, who is this person to you, or where are you headed? But this person in security, like, I give them major props. They were like, they totally caught these kids off guard. They're grabbing all the what do you call them, boarding passes, and they call it the name, like, very no BS. Look directly at the child. They're like, who is this man to you? And the kid was kind of like, what? And they're like, what do you call this man? And the kid was like, that's my dad. And like, I know you could tell they were so caught off guard, but it was like, they're looking, who is this person to you? How do you respond? Do you defer to that person to answer for you? Can you answer this question yourself? And they asked that same question the same way to all of the children, looking for those red flags, and especially a mixture of those things that just feel off. That's more commonly why you're seeing those signs in airports. And the scary thing, if I had, let's say, groomed someone and I was their trafficker, and I was like, hey, kind of like, let's say, like modeling gig type role, and I'm slowly kind of pressuring them to post more provocative photos or pose for more provocative photos. And then I'm like, hey, there's actually an opportunity in LA. Like, I'd like to send you there. Even if I'm not with that person at the airport, they might think they're going for some modeling gig, making money, even if I'm managing their funds. And they get on the plane, they go to this modeling gig that, again, where they're being coerced and pushed into posting more provocative content, posing for provocative content. It becomes commercialized, it's advertised. That person's technically being sex trafficked, but they think that they're going to the airport for an opportunity in LA, right? So again, these things are a lot more difficult to sense and suss out than you would think, because physically restraining and holding somebody in trafficking or putting them in a cage, while those things can happen, it's a lot more difficult to hold someone there than it is to control and manipulate them and to target people, again, with those specific vulnerabilities. So those are just some of our myths and misconceptions regarding how trafficking happens. Now, before we kind of get into the most common process, I want to look at the different types of trafficking. Now, there's a lot of different kind of subgroups of trafficking. These are the two main categories, especially that are identified legally in the United States. First one is sex trafficking. I'm going to read you a definition. the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for the purpose of a commercial sex act through force, fraud, or coercion, 3 very important words when it comes to trafficking, or when the person induced to perform such an act is under 18 years old, even without proof of force, fraud, or coercion. Very important distinction. If you are 17 years old and you are, again, there's like some kind of commercial sex act that you're participating in, you don't even have to be like, there doesn't have to be proof. Obviously you have been, but there doesn't have to be proof of force, fraud, or coercion like there would have to be for an adult. Even without the presence of proof of that, it's still sex trafficking. Next, forced labor. And this is where, especially with forced labor, there's like many different types of forced labor that, kind of subcategories. But ultimately, it is the use of force, fraud, or coercion to compel a person to provide labor or services. So you can kind of think like, a businessman coming in where there's people who have, immigrant status, and they are only paying this person $4 an hour because they know that this person might need the money. Maybe they even hold their passport. So they're targeting an already vulnerable group of people who need income, who may not, maybe they don't have their papers, are not here legally. So they feel like they can really take advantage of those people. That's typically kind of where forced labor happens. And unfortunately, it's definitely, we're not immune to it here in the United States. This can happen anywhere. Now, with that, I do want to identify the process by which most trafficking happens. And again, it is rare to be kidnapped into human trafficking. And people who are kidnapped, they're looking for people who aren't going to go notice if they go missing. I tell the college girls I work with, if somebody knows that you are in a sorority at school, you have a really strong, stable support system, randomly kidnapping you is not ideal for them because they know that that's probably what becomes that sensationalized story in the media. This is also where, obviously already marginalized groups also, there's been, even in true crime, I'm a huge true crime listener, and actually Crime Junkie does a great job of this at highlighting stories of marginalized groups, because sometimes those stories don't go nearly as viral online, in the news. And I think that as a society, we've gotten a lot better at that and still highlighting those instances and those crimes as well, and like missing people. But the hard thing is that is what can also add another layer here to make you an even more targeted group. And this has been backed up by research as well. So keeping that in mind, this is kind of the process again by what they're trying to identify. And we're going to talk about like the things that like other risk factors. Again, of course, marginalized groups. We've talked about that. Kids that are in foster care don't have that stable support system. We've kind of referred to this. Kids maybe like, again, wouldn't be as noticed if they go missing, or people that wouldn't produce that more sensationalized news story, as fucked up as that is. Those would be people a trafficker would more commonly target. So with that being said, first step here, they're looking for that vulnerability in that person they can easily target. Again, we will get to that more in just a second here. From there, that's when they start to really recruit and groom this person. They might promise them things. They might promise them like a better future. They might have a job opportunity for them. They might love bomb this person, where they're just like showering them with gifts and flattery and like attention and affection, and make this person feel a very positive emotion, right? Very connected to this person. And the traffickers often providing some sort of need to them, whether that's self-esteem, whether that's shelter, financial income, belonging, love, any number of needs. And because of that, a lot of times that's when you start to really, you trust your trafficker, right? This person provides a need to me. They provide me shelter. They're giving me income. This is my partner. So inherently, I start to trust this person, which makes it very easy for that trafficker to begin controlling and manipulating their victim. They may also be moved to another location, the victim. And that's when the exploitation starts, the force, fraud, coercion. And I'm going to kind of give an example of how this might happen too in just a second. But this is where the person, and again, most often doesn't realize it's happening. So there's some means that's making them feel like they need to commit these, sex acts or this labor for this person. And there's a variety of ways they can do that. But again, it's through force, fraud, or coercion. Then they begin to control and retain that person, right? Whether it's like a debt they're holding over their head or violence, different threats, they might threaten their family members. Again, if there's a child involved, they could threaten the victim's child. There's surveillance, isolating this person, which typically is also going to happen through kind of the grooming phase, right? They make them feel very dependent on them. This is the only person that can help me. They kind of remove you from your support system if you didn't. And again, typically they target someone with a very unstable support system, but they're going to really start to isolate you, and maybe they even control communication. Maybe they even hold this person's phone, or they start talking really negatively about their support system or, what they have of a support system. So that's, again, the process by which these things most often happen. They target, they provide that need, they groom them, get them to trust them, then they can coerce and control, manipulate, and get them to do what they want them to. Then they retain them through those, again, violence, threats, manipulating the victim. That is why when it comes to trying to save a trafficking victim, just going up to them and telling them to leave is not going to probably produce the results you're looking for, because number one, they may not even realize what's happening is trafficking. And that's true for a lot of survivors. They come out and they don't realize it until years after the fact. We actually have an interview on the podcast with Sandy Storm, who is a trafficking survivor. And she speaks specifically to that point. A lot of the other survivors I've worked with, we don't realize it until we get the proper education on it, because there are also so many things that go around on the internet that are not true. Like, obviously the person that's kidnapped and, physically forced into it would understand that they're being sex trafficked or that it's forced labor. But the person who is most often the victim, the person that's been manipulated psychologically, who's made to think that I'm choosing this, these are my decisions. They're not thinking that they're a victim, because that's how skilled these traffickers are, and that's how scary this process is. And obviously they are being coerced into these things. So it's just really important to understand this process and to spread this information with people, because so often we get these misconceptions that are very damaging because we're not looking for the right things and we're not identifying the risk factors or the signs of most of the situations. So I do want to move on to kind of what makes something trafficking, and then look for okay, what exactly are they looking for, and what's a more common example of this? So why would something be trafficking? I'm going to give you an example first, and then we can even break it down within that example to kind of help better understand. So let's say a girl's on a dating app and she meets a guy. He comes on really strong. This relationship is rapidly progressing. He's love bombing her for actual love bombing, not the way we commonly throw it around these days, but this is love bombing someone with the intention to manipulate them, showering with gifts, flattery, affection, love. And note that just buying someone gifts is not love bombing here, okay? It's buying them gifts with the expectation of something. So again, there's genuine love bombing happening. That person starts to also, control their contact with their support system. So again, maybe they're putting their support system down. They're controlling communication through holding their phone. They're really monitoring that communication. They're trying to isolate this person, whether even just mentally and emotionally, or even physically isolate this person from their support system. And then from here, that's when, because this person has been isolated, they can't have those family members that are pointing these things out. They become very dependent on their trafficker, where they feel like this is the only person who gets me. This is the only person who can help me, because they've been made to think their support system is wrong or, off base for whatever reason. And now that's when there starts to become those threats or intimidation, manipulation to get this victim to do things. And maybe that's, I need you to go commit this sex act with this person to pay off a debt that you have with me, or to help the business, and they're being made to feel like they're part of this, business deal or operation. And again, they're being kind of tricked into it, right? So that's where this kind of starts, because they have total control over this person. This person no longer really has any freedom, and now they can kind of trick them into getting them to do what they want them to. Then from there, that's where these services obviously continue, and then they can start to commercialize and advertise this victim and these services, whatever that may look like. So that would be kind of a more common example. And if you really look at that again, it's very scary, because this is just something that, like, we all can jump on a dating app, right? But then they really target someone, they love bomb them, and then it's accompanied by these really low lows. And actually, Sandy talks about this. She says it's like a chemical cocktail in your brain where there's high highs and low lows, and it really confuses someone. And when you start to feel like you owe somebody something, obviously, whether that's your affection or helping them or whatever it might be, it's very, very hard to get out of this. And you might even fear for your life, your safety getting out of this situation. So I do kind of want to, again, really break down, why is this trafficking? Now, first and foremost, again, if this was somebody that was under the age of 18, this is sex trafficking no matter what. No proof is needed. You don't have to pick anything out. This is sex trafficking. If they're not, though, there is obviously a commercial sex act being committed, whether that is for drugs, whether it's for money, shelter, food, to pay off a debt, whatever it is, there's some kind of commercial sex act here. There's also, of course, force, fraud, or coercion happening. This person's being kind of tricked into it. And there was some kind of manipulation or deceit that led up to the start of the sexual exploitation. There also, there's some obviously big discrepancies in the level of freedom that the victim has. If their phone is being controlled, or for forced labor, if somebody's passport is being held, if your money is being controlled, you're losing your freedoms. It makes it very hard for you to get away. When the trafficker is in control of you, that is a very good indicator that there is some kind of trafficking going on. They look for that control because, again, that's how they keep you here. That's how they retain you in that trafficking relationship. Now, a couple little differences between a bad relationship, not just, but, whether it's domestic violence or emotional abuse, that and trafficking. Again, both are horrible, but there are differences. So with human trafficking, the trafficker is profiting off the sexual exploitation. So in this example, the trafficker, even if this is this person's, even if it's their husband, they're profiting. Even if they're saying, do this for the business because you need to pay off whatever debt, or if you want, XYZ drugs or money or whatever it is, you need to do this. They're coercing them into it. That trafficker is profiting also off of this person's sexual exploitation. That obviously does make it trafficking. They also, again, difference between bad relationship and trafficking. They've been tricked into doing this, right? They've been manipulated into it. And this person can't just easily leave the situation. Now, in a domestic violence relationship, obviously they're for, different but still horrible reasons. It is very hard for the victim to leave that relationship. Here, you obviously have that, but it could also be that this person is, again, withholding a passport, an ID, a phone, controls all their funds. There are nuances here, and typically with trafficking, you're going to see many of these things present. And again, there does have to be force, fraud, or coercion for adults for it to be sex trafficking. Now, I want to look at what traffickers really look for, because I think this is, again, one of those things, especially because I work with college girls, they kind of feel like, oh, I'm in college, so I must be a victim that they're looking for. And that's really not the case. They're again targeting someone who is in a vulnerable season of life. Now, that doesn't mean that a first-year student at a college, they're away from their family, maybe they came from a hard family dynamic, that they couldn't still be targeted, of course. Even somebody who has a great family dynamic that is going to school 5 minutes from home could be targeted. These are just the most common risk factors. So first one, emotional neediness or low self-esteem. And we'll get into this, but I mean, just in general, when it comes to safety, as simple as it sounds, building self-esteem is one of, if not the most important thing you can do for yourself. Really knowing what you deserve, what's okay, what's not okay, and being okay not tolerating those things and setting boundaries. And obviously that can be much easier said than done, especially when we're looking at things like a trafficking situation. But building, self-esteem, largely important. It is something they target. Unstable support systems, for reasons that I hope are kind of clear now, because again, they look to isolate the victim from their family. And this could be kids that are homeless, kids in foster care, where they have kind of a rocky support system. And sometimes just having one trustworthy adult in a child's life can really, really help keep them safe. So some kind of unstable support system, having any kind of like food or housing insecurity or instability, family rejection, a history of abuse, and especially sexual abuse. And that's why a lot of traffickers will try to get that information, because it tells them that you may already be used to some form of that type of exploitation, which to them might help make their disgusting, vile job easier. Next thing, child welfare or juvenile justice involvement, substance dependence, family or friends obviously being involved in trafficking. And I encourage you to listen to Sandy's story on our podcast. And she also has a book. I would really encourage listening to her story. I think hearing from trafficking survivors is really powerful, and it does help you understand how, first of all, horrible these processes are, how difficult these situations are to get out of, and how early exploitation can really lead to a lifetime of not realizing that you might deserve better or what's really happening. And that is very, very true for Sandy's story, and it's horrible. And she was trafficked by a family member. Substance dependence, and that's where, they might say like, well, I'll give you drugs if you do XYZ. Undocumented or temporary immigration status. And again, that just like I talked about with like forced labor, targeting those vulnerabilities and trying to get those people to work for next to nothing, if not maybe working for nothing. And that's it's just disgusting to think that people will do that. And when you think about that specifically, you're looking most often for someone who is running or facilitating some sort of business operation. These people can be anybody. That could be anywhere from like a small business owner to a millionaire that is facilitating the forced labor. So it's just really important, again, to understand the full scope of these things so you really know. And I want to go through a huge list of different signs of trafficking you might be able to kind of see some of these just from what we've talked about thus far, but some more things that you can try to look out for. And these some of them are going to cross over between like forced labor and sex trafficking. Some are obviously specific to both. Number one, and I've mentioned this a couple times, somebody else controlling your ID, your passport, your money, obviously, especially if you are dealing with someone who's not, like, let's say a U.S. citizen, because I'm in the U.S., and somebody's holding their passport. Like, they literally can't leave this situation, and that trafficker can hold that over them. And they also, I will say too, like a very strong fear for authorities, because traffickers can use that to almost kind of like put fear in them, where, if you don't do this, then I'm going to report you and you're going to face like legal consequences and stuff. So it really, it's just sick, the things that they use, but you can see how that would really completely manipulate somebody and make them very afraid for authorities. Like, did my trafficker let them know? And the traffickers are going to make them very fearful of authorities because they don't want them going and trying to get help, because they know what they're doing is fucked up and wrong. Rarely allowed to speak for themselves. Again, you can think of like the airport example with the children, or you can think of even, oh my gosh, what's her name? Amy. I'm totally blanking on her name. She disappeared on the ferry several decades ago. And people have said that they've seen her places. And there was actually one account of a woman that saw her in like a restroom, and Amy was like very quiet, trying to like communicate stuff. And it was clear that she was very afraid to say anything or speak up. And when there were certain people around, like with the encounters, people have like, there was also a guy that was at like a bar, and the second that people came up, like she stopped speaking. So if somebody's afraid to speak for themselves, they don't want to say the wrong thing, they don't want to give something away, very big indicator something is off, even if it's not trafficking. Somebody being monitored, being very like fearful, being coached, they're very submissive to someone. If you have a friend or a family member who's all of a sudden in a relationship where they're now completely isolated, they've lost contact, this relationship progressed very quick, and they're very submissive, and maybe this is even somebody that like typically isn't like that, right? That could be a sign of something larger going on, like trafficking. They can't freely come and go. Again, you can think of that person who is a victim of forced labor. They can't freely come and go from the brothel that they're in. They have to be accompanied if they need to go to a doctor's appointment, if they get pregnant, if they're actually going to, commit some kind of like sex act. They're being escorted wherever they go because they don't want this person to escape. Works excessively long hours without breaks or overtime pay. Again, they're being taken advantage of. Live and work in the same place. Owes a debt they can never seem to repay. It's kind of like moving the goalpost, right? Where you do this to help repay the debt, and then next thing you know, it's the next thing that they need to do to repay this debt. Obviously, signs of physical abuse, restraint, or neglect. And please remember, these things, while we're talking about the most common way it happens, people can still be kidnapped and physically restrained as a trafficking victim. Displays extreme anxiety, fear, or distrust, especially when asked personal questions because they're probably afraid to say the wrong thing. Sudden isolation, like we talked about. Stories that aren't adding up. They're secretive. They suddenly are communicating with someone. For kids, if they suddenly have like a random adult come into their lives, or they're like showing up with gifts or really expensive items, those things all could be an indicator that they are actively being groomed. If you're asking questions and they're giving you details that just really aren't adding up, or they have like conflicting stories and conflicting details, again, an indicator. But there are also innocent explanations for that. So a lot of these things would probably be present to where you're like, something really is wrong and going on here. Rehearsed or inconsistent stories, promises that sound too good to be true, right? Somebody promising you this better life, somebody promising you this wild job opportunity that's like, this literally feels too good to be true. It often is. At the relationship that seems too good to be true, it very well could be. There could be the manipulation that's lying in wait. Those high highs can be accompanied by those low lows. If somebody's trying to get you to commit to the relationship early, they want you to move with them very quickly, these should be red flags, if anything, of some sort of like emotional instability with this person. If they are telling you like, with love bombing, like it's a difference of, oh my gosh, like somebody's excited about the relationship. They're like, I really see this going somewhere. Like, I'm really excited about you. I think that like we could have a great future together, versus the person that's like, I literally can't live without you. You're my soulmate. And you know this person for like 2 weeks. It's that difference where it's not innocent excitement. It's now something that feels a little bit more like sinister and again, with that intent to manipulate to some extent, where if they're saying like, I can't live without you, that in essence is kind of telling you like, I don't know what I would do if you leave me, kind of thing, manipulating you. So those are just some things with kind of how to spot trafficking. And on social media, when I was like, I've been posting about this recently because I had a video that blew up. So I've been answering some questions. So one of them was like, do they work in groups or do they work alone? And there are traffickers that do work alone. You can think of like, they call it like the Romeo trafficker, where this is somebody that is just kind of operating on like, there's an opportunity, and maybe this is, and more like, you can think of like in the US with sex trafficking, like somebody that finds their victim online, they find their victim at school, and then they start to groom them and manipulate them, love bomb them, and they kind of go more of like the relationship route. A lot of people, though, do work in groups, and those groups don't have to be, 15 people. That can just be one other person that they're using. Because when you think about it with trafficking, especially if they're operating out of some location, like a massage parlor, a hotel, online advertisements, any kind of, even like street operations, they're most likely going to need somebody who does the recruiting, somebody who's like running whatever physical location the trafficking is happening out of. You have somebody who could be transporting the victims. So there's different roles that would have to be played within the trafficking operation. But even if it's not necessarily run out of like a physical location, they still often do work with even at least just one other person. Now, in a lot of federal cases, a lot of those are like, the cases contain like 1 to 2 people, but those 1 to 2 people are often part of some kind of larger group, and those groups can range. I mean, it could just be an illegal enterprise. It can be, a number of things like your mom and pop. It can be gangs. It could be full-blown like cartel mafia, which is like groups of like 31 plus people. Is rare in the US, but those things do exist and can exist. So it can really range in group size. Most people, though, aren't just completely working alone in trafficking. And really kind of the last thing I want to talk about is how do you protect yourself? Because I think, again, you might understand this process and it's like, okay, wow, these things really do happen over time. And it almost kind of becomes a little more scary because it's harder to have those tangible things like we talked about with like a zip tie on your car. So how can you better protect yourself? And this is where, again, self-esteem is so critical, and understanding who you have in your life. For kids, like I mentioned, just having one trustworthy adult really can make all the difference. Somebody that they can lean on, that they can turn to. And if you let's say that you work in a school, trying to provide kids resources if you can, if you see that, and obviously in like a healthy manner and way, but getting the kids the support that they need, working on just having healthy relationships and knowing what that looks like. I think a lot of us grow up, especially, I think there's more awareness now, especially for like younger generations, but you look at our parents where there wasn't nearly as much awareness and conversation about what healthy relationships look like, what setting boundaries looks like. So I think just general education on that helps us know, okay, then when I have that self-esteem, how I can set those boundaries and when I need to do that. And of course, like I love therapy. I've been to therapy many seasons of my life, and I think that's always a great resource as well. Let's see here. Knowledge of online safety too. Just knowing how it happens, helping educate the people around you, and having your basic needs met, but knowing who meets them. We all have things that we need in order to survive, whether that is, again, drugs, income, or sorry, not drugs. Drugs can be something, though, that if there is a dependency, somebody obviously might be looking for that, especially if they don't have, income or whatever else, and that can be swapped for the sex acts in sex trafficking. But sorry, when I'm looking, when you're looking at the needs that we really have, food, shelter, income, love, belonging, we're social creatures. We enjoy feeling good about ourselves, like having somebody that sees that in us, having someone that loves us, and having what feels like stability. And it's just really important to be mindful of who meets those needs. And even if it's not looking in the face of trafficking, it's really critical to make sure that even just, for friends that could take advantage of you or that maybe aren't trustworthy in business, partnering with people that have the right intentions and knowing like who does meet and satisfy my most basic needs, and how, if somebody that doesn't have good intentions, I suss that out. How can I go get those needs met elsewhere? And if I need to have help, how can I get that help in a way that is still safe for me? And as always, really looking out for the people around you too. If you know and understand how trafficking happens, looking out for the people around you, looking out when you're in public and reporting it. And remembering that sometimes like going up to somebody that you think might be a trafficking victim can put them in more danger. So reporting it, documenting everything you can, looking at local resources is really typically the safest route to get somebody help. And also just using your general safety tips, right? Like if you're going on online dates, knowing just the things to look out for, things that could be red flags, understanding some of the manipulative tactics that people might use, knowing what love bombing really looks like, knowing what foot in the door looks like. And when you go in public, just in general, being aware, trusting your gut, remembering that most of the time you're not having to look out for the person trying to randomly kidnap you. You're having to look out for the person that's going to try to gain your trust and provide those needs to you and create a close relationship. So again, a lot of these things start at building self-esteem, having confidence to set boundaries, and just education around the topic, so you know how to spot things that aren't right, aren't off, or you're not getting treated in a way that is okay or right, and might be downright illegal. So I hope that today really provided you with a better picture of how these things happen. Nothing makes me more angry than seeing these stories go viral, and nothing makes me feel more like heartbroken than seeing people in the comments thanking this person for posting something, especially when they're knowingly doing it, knowingly leaving this shit up. And we're all human. We all make mistakes. Sometimes you need it pointed out to you. When I see stuff like that, I always try to message the person. And if you see somebody posting something, message them. I would expect if I post something that was, rooted in and false information, we really try to do our due diligence here. But if there was, we are human. We make mistakes. But it is on you to handle that properly. And I really encourage the policeman who has all the fucking misinformation on his profile to take that shit down. And to any other creators that are creating content knowingly using these viral myths for clickbait, for whatever else it is. And if you want to use it as clickbait and then you want to give accurate information right after, all power to you, because those stories do go viral and we need people to have the right information. But if you are perpetuating these viral myths about human trafficking or any crime, instilling fear in people unnecessarily, and directing people away from how these things most often happen, you are putting people at more risk, because they don't know what they should really be looking out for. They don't have proper information, and now they're just blatantly looking out for the wrong thing, living with more fear. Women, people of marginalized groups, already live with so much fear. They're in justified fear. Why would we give them more things to have to worry about that aren't even based in any credible research or reports? So that is my challenge to people. It is my challenge to you. If you see this stuff, please call it out, comment, message the people, send them information, accurate information, and go do your own research. I'm going to have every single source that has been used in this episode in our research in the show notes. And we have the human trafficking resources in the link tree that we have in our social media bio. But just to kind of name them off really quick: Love 146, Polaris, Human Trafficking Institute, PMC/NIH, DeliverFund, CDC, Guardian Group, Snopes, U.S. Department of State, International Organization for Migration, UNODC, NCBI, ScienceDirect, to name a few. So there are lots of credible resources out there. I highly encourage that you go do your own research. Take what I told you today, take it with a grain of salt. Go do your own research. Make sure you know these things. Call it out when you see it. Always trust your gut. Sense the things around you. Go build some self-esteem and know what you deserve, and know that anything that I've talked about today, of somebody manipulating you, even if it's not sex trafficking, even if it's not domestic violence, you deserve better. You don't deserve any of these things. You don't deserve anybody manipulating you, even if it's just a friendship where your safety isn't necessarily in jeopardy, but they're still manipulating you. You don't deserve it. It's bullshit. And I am always here to give tips and resources and information. Please let us know if there's anything else questions you have after today's episode. If there's more information, if you yourself or someone you know has been trafficked and is comfortable and willing to share their story, I would love to amplify their story on this podcast. Please let us know anything you want to hear. It's all below in the show notes. Please let us know how you felt about today's episode. And as always, I appreciate you for being here. Please, if there's any episode that you share, even if you don't share the episode directly, share the information in it. Thank you guys very much for listening today. I appreciate you. This is just one of my hot button topics, and it is my pleasure to chat about this.